Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. First and foremost, hi everyone, and welcome to tonight's discussion, Teacher Unions and Social Justice, Building Power Through Labor and Community Partnerships. We are so excited to hear from our inspiring panelists and really dig in and learn what it takes to build and win with the community. This event is sponsored by Rethinking Schools in partnership with the Bargaining for the Common Good Network, which is convened by Center for Innovation and Worker Organizing at Rutgers University, the Action Center on Race and the Economy, and the Kalamanovitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Poor at Georgetown University. We're going to start with a few words about bargaining for the common good. So bargaining for the common good is community and unions partnering around a long-term vision for the structural changes they want to see in their communities, using the union's right to collective bargaining or organizing as a critical moment in a broader campaign to win that change. Tonight, we will hear from panelists who have done or are doing just that, and hear how we want to start to turn away from transactional relationships and turn towards authentic power building and struggle with one another. Rethinking Schools is a nonprofit publisher and advocacy organization dedicated to sustaining and strengthening public education through social justice teaching and education activism. Its magazine, books, and other resources promote equity and racial justice in the classroom. Rethinking Schools encourages grassroots efforts in schools and communities to enhance the learning and well-being of our children and to build a broad democratic movement for social and environmental justice. The most recent book published by Rethinking Schools is Teacher Unions and Social Justice, Organizing for the Schools and Communities Our Students Deserve. The book is, I had it upside down, sorry. The book is inspiration for this webinar tonight. And so participants are encouraged 25% off. Should be able to see a link for the discount. Okay, so now to our panelists. The panelists for tonight's discussion are Amanda Kail. She's a teacher organizer in Nashville, Tennessee. She's the president of the Metropolitan Nashville Education Association as well. Welcome, Amanda. Next, we have Ingrid Walker-Henry, who's a 20-year teacher in Milwaukee Public Schools, and she serves as a vice president at the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association and is the teaching and learning. And last but not least, Esperanza Martinez is a former community organizer with the LA Labor and Community Strategy Center and the Bus Riders Union. She was hired by United Teachers Los Angeles as their first parent community organizer in 2014. And she currently serves as the community schools coach for UTLA and LAUSD. And finally, I am your moderator. I'm Bianca Cunningham. I am a former Verizon Wireless worker who led my coworkers in 7 stores across Brooklyn, New York, to join the Communication Workers of America, or the CWA, in 2014, making us the first unionized retail workers in the company. I'm now on staff at Action Center on Race and the Economy, or ACRE as we refer to it, working at the intersection of economic, racial, and gender equity, where I serve as the National Campaigns Director for the Bargaining for the Common Good Network. So before we begin, I want to say a little bit about how we're going to run tonight's event. The first half of the panel, we're going to switch it up a little bit, y'all. So what we're going to do is we're going to hear from each of our panelists. So we'll hear from one panelist for about 7 minutes, and they'll share about their campaign. And then we're going to open up the floor to allow for one person or one question that's directly related and relevant to the person who just spoke, so to the panelists who just spoke. And so we'll start off with Amanda, for instance. Amanda will share about the exciting organizing work that they're doing, and then we'll open up the floor and allow one question that's going to be directly for Amanda. Same thing for Ingrid, and then again for Esperanza. For the last half of the panel, we'll open it up for questions in general. And so this is the time where we're going to be looking for questions in the Q&A. So we encourage you to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions as they come up during our discussion. Okay, and now for part one of our discussion, we'll first hear from Amanda. Amanda, welcome.
Thank you. I am honored to be here among so many incredible organizers. And I think, I was thinking about what part I could really contribute to this discussion. And I think it's what I want to ground myself in my discussion is to say that when I first learned about bargaining for the common good, I thought it was a great idea. But the problem is that here in Tennessee, we can't bargain. We're not a collective bargaining state. Many states are not collective bargaining states. And we're in a deeply conservative state. And the labor laws here are not helpful. So I wanted to be able to talk about, even with all of those barriers, how we still ground our work at MNEA in organizing for the common good. Not so much bargaining, but organizing for the common good. So a little background about ourselves, about MNEA. We led a Red for Ed movement a few years ago that culminated in a walkout. And we had a whole slate of organizing rank and file members who ran for office within our local, and we won. And we were feeling pretty great. We had built up this movement really around funding for our schools. But we were teachers, and we were fighting for teacher salaries. And one of the things that really hit us and was a huge wake-up call was when COVID hit. Because when COVID hit, we really found ourselves in a lot of ways standing alone and trying to fight for safe working conditions. And what we very quickly realized was that if we were not organizing for our whole community, that we were not strong enough to keep our schools safe. We weren't strong enough to keep teachers safe, but we also weren't strong enough to keep kids and their families safe. And that was really just not going to work. And so we really had to rethink coming at our work from a real bread and butter sort of a standpoint, where we were fighting for typical things, pay, working conditions, all of that, and really moving towards a community-based organizing. The other thing that was really important for us to understand was that here in Nashville, we have really seen that there's sort of three groups that organize around schools in Nashville. There are the people who are organizing around being very pro-public education. So for example, people who are fighting charters and vouchers. And then there are the people who are fighting for racial and social justice and equity. And then there are the people who are fighting who labor, right? So people who are fighting for, funding for the schools, salaries, working conditions, things of that nature. And the three groups really have not worked together in a comprehensive way. And that means we don't have a common vision. And if we don't have a common vision, we get pitted against each other and we always lose. All three of those groups are not going to win until we figure out that we have a common vision that works together. The other thing is, we can't think of ourselves as separate from the communities that we serve. We're not. We are, as a teacher union, we are our communities as well. And we have to think of ourselves that way. And so when we're fighting for things like racial and social justice, we're also fighting for our members. It's not a separate thing. And so I think I wanted to ground us in that before I talk just a little bit about the organizing that we have. So we've learned all of these things, and we decided to embark on a journey where we work with some of our fellow unions who also are in the schools, SEIU most notably, who represent our support staff, and also some community groups. And these community groups are very grassroots. They're not sort of the big foundation funded groups. These are very grassroots groups that are very connected to the communities that we serve in our schools in Nashville. And so we have joined with a group called a Mahaba Center, which is a organization that made up of Arabic speaking parents. We have a large Arabic population here in Nashville. A group called Workers' Dignity, which is a workers' rights group that works a lot with our Latinx community here in Nashville. And then another group called Safer Schools Nashville that is made up of current and recently graduated high school students who are concerned about issues of policing in schools and social and emotional supports for students. And so we've joined with all of these groups, and we've worked really hard to come up with a sort of a common goal. And that is, we are going to work together to identify people in our high schools, so staff members, teachers, support staff, but also community members and students, to do a grassroots visioning project as well as a needs assessment, and to ask basically two questions. One, what do you love about your school or community? And two, what is your vision for your school or community? And just real basic. And so we are going to systematically do this for all of our high schools over 3 years and use the data that we gather to drive our agenda forward. And so whatever agenda MNEA has, it's not a separate agenda from our support staff. It's not a separate agenda from our students or our families or the surrounding community. It's something that is unified, and that we can push for that local organizing and ownership of the schools. The other thing that I want to mention about that is that this is also our membership campaign, right? So when we go into schools and we talk to potential members, we're talking to them about, what do you love about your school and what's your vision? And do you want to be a part of making that happen? That's why you join MNEA. You join us because we want to make that vision happen. So it is very much a grassroots thing in progress. We are still working together to put all of this together. One of the things that we're working on now is working with our community groups to create the trainings for the folks that we're going to actually enlist to do the surveying. And we feel it's really important that all of the groups have a part to share. So we want our community groups to teach us in the schools what we need to understand about their communities. And then those of us who work in the schools can share the information about how things work in schools. Who decides what? If there's something that we want to change, how do we go about changing that? And so there's sort of this level of real solidarity that we're trying to build. We want to get to this point where we can recognize the contributions of all who are involved and use that to move us forward. And so that's just sort of a snapshot of what it is we're working on right now. We're super excited, but I'm gonna, I think, start to wrap up there and see if we have some questions.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was so fire, an amazing way to start this conversation. Yes, we are organizing for the common good. We want to include everyone. So we have a question from Erin, which is, what was the first step in creating a community-based structure in MNEA?
So the first step was to look at really was to do some community mapping. It was to think about who are the organizations out there who are working with the families and the students and our fellow employees in schools that can help us make this happen. We needed some organizations to help us with this. And so a lot of that was about just really looking around and finding out who really are those groups. And then having some really, some basic beginning conversations. Being honest that MNEA has not always reached out, that we have not always been there with the community. Having some real honest conversations about that, and allowing those relationships to develop so that we can co-create together.
Thank you so much, Amanda. There are so many more great questions for you. Folks, I'll just remind you, we're going to have time to answer some of these questions at the end, at the last half of the session. But for right now, we're going to move on to the Vice President of the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, Ingrid. Hello, welcome.
Hello. Good evening, all. I plan on sharing a condensed version of Milwaukee Teachers Education Association and Schools and Communities United story. So there we are. Okay, just making sure. There are a few articles in the book, Teachers, Unions, and Social Justice, that provide insight about Milwaukee and what we do as a union and with our partners. Some of those writings are Unite, Resist, and Win, Organizing Against Public School Takeovers in Milwaukee, a Revitalized Teacher Union Movement, Reflections from the Field, and before the march, before the strike, the Art Build, and hopefully I've included a few Art Build pictures in there. If not, definitely check out the chapter. So my name is Ingrid Walker-Henry, and I'm the Vice President of the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association and co-chair of Schools and Communities United. This is once again an overview of the past and present of the Milwaukee education scene. So I'm a 21-year MPS teacher who was raised in MPS schools with my mom, who retired as a teacher from MPS. I don't know many people who can say that they were chaperoning field trips, putting up bulletin boards, and breaking down classrooms at the age of 8, but I can. I'm a proud MPS graduate, parent, auntie, cousin, and a lot of other relations. I say that to say that my Milwaukee public school roots run deep. If there are charter or voucher schools in your area, you have repeatedly heard about choice. Choice is a good word. Who wouldn't want choice? The problem is choice has been used as a reason to not fully fund public schools. This means students with special needs, English language learners, Title I, or any other initiatives that students deserve for a well-rounded education, they're not receiving it. So Milwaukee has choice. Milwaukee has the oldest private voucher program in the country. UW-Milwaukee charter schools, the City of Milwaukee charter schools, and the Milwaukee public school system, which has the public schools, also charter schools. Only 56% of the children in Milwaukee attend Milwaukee Public Schools. In 2011, former Governor Scott Walker introduced Act 10. In addition to increasing pension contributions and increasing healthcare costs up to about $10,000 per year, Act 10 stripped collective bargaining rights. So gone are the days when our students' learning conditions and our work conditions were bargained and in a contract. Fair share ended, and every union in Wisconsin is required to hold a recertification election yearly. So membership in the state union went from 90,000 plus members to 29,000 at this point. In the midst of all the Act 10 uprising, and even presently, Milwaukee has had to keep our eye on multiple takeover efforts. So Milwaukee's Mayor Tom Barrett was part of a plan to take over Milwaukee Public Schools. These efforts included Democratic leaders and groups like Democrats for Educational Reform. There was an attempt made by former Governor Scott Walker with entities like the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce. This attempt was pushed by Republicans and even some Democrats. This effort was called the Opportunity Schools and Partnership Program. MTEA called it what it was, a public school takeover. There was even on a smaller scale an attempt by Dr. Howard Fuller to take over North Division High School. Fighting privatization attempts in the form of takeovers take more than educators. What started out as a coalition of educators and concerned community members to fight the first takeover attempt turned into the coalition called Schools and Communities United, which was comprised of over 20 community organizations and many individuals and groups who walked in at over 100 public schools, who held multiple rallies, attended listening sessions and meetings with or without an invitation, and made enough noise to give anyone pause to take up the job of takeover czar after that attempt in 2015. As some of the pictures show, it's necessary to hold multiple rallies, educational meetings, conduct surveys to get the city involved. At the height of the 2015 efforts, no takeover signs were on lawns all over the city, and the number of no takeover buttons being worn was in the thousands. This was only made possible by the partnerships that grew from every person and every group understanding the need for a strong public education system. Out of the community meetings and surveys, Schools and Communities United published a booklet pictured here, Fulfill the Promise, the Schools and Communities Our Children Deserve, inspired by the Chicago's Teacher Union. This gave the community and organizations the information they needed to understand what they were fighting for. That initial work that came from the coalition to stop the MPS takeover and turned into Schools and Communities United and was able to defeat takeover attempts, it has led to 12 community schools in MPS. That work put 4,000 people in the street in front of central office to fight budget cuts to classrooms and cuts that would force spouses off of employee health care. 4,000 students, educators, and families in Milwaukee that made sure that our schools would not continue to suffer austerity measures. That work led to the creation of a safe haven district against ICE and supporting students and pushing for ethnic studies courses. Members have even pulled in community support to create policies that ensure children in every school have access to music and art teachers. All over the country, locals are facing challenges similar to the one I outlined. What I want to leave you with is the idea that despite the obstacles, you can win and you must win. The fight does not and should not be shouldered by one group, but by the community.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. That was so amazing. Thank you for that PowerPoint. You just really brought everything together. So I'll remind people that right now we'll open up the floor for one direct question. If anybody has a burning direct question for Ingrid based on what she just presented. I see some general, more like broad questions in the Q&A, but I wonder if anybody has a direct question for Ingrid about the work that they've been doing in Milwaukee. Okay, so I see one. Can you share more about the ethnic studies fights or victories that you've had?
So that is definitely a collaboration with students in our community schools. They saw that there was well, I'm actually going to go with the longer version. The students actually surveyed all of their classmates. They saw that there was a need, a want, a desire for ethnic study courses. I think we can all point out the flaws in our current history textbooks. And the students started petitioning board members, administration to get that to happen. So what has happened within that is that our educators also work to petition, work to talk to, and work to support the students in their desire for the ethnic study courses. And it started with, I want to say, 2 teachers, and it has been expanded, I believe in the last budget cycle, to all the high schools in the district.
Thank you for that answer. That sounds like really exciting and necessary work. So thank you so much, Ingrid. And I'll remind people, I see there's more questions. We're going to get to them. Last but not least, we're going to hear from our coach, Esperanza. Welcome.
Thank you, Bianca. I love that pink, by the way. Good evening, everyone. My name is Esperanza Martinez again, and I am the community school coach with United Teachers Los Angeles. And I want to start just by taking a quick minute to honor the late Karen Lewis, president of the Chicago Teachers Union, whose vision and commitment to the radical imagination inspired many of us today. And say thank you for inviting me to share from UTLA's journey that is really situated inside of a long and rich history of social movements led by women, Black, Indigenous people of color, students, and LGBTQ people. So I want to start by saying that the story of UTLA is one of experimentation and one of exploring multiple fronts as possible points of interventions and places to organize, to fight, and to win. So to quote Teachers Union and Social Justice, in many unions, sometimes the most dramatic changes stem from rank and file organizing that pushes leadership to take more militant, democratic, and radical action for social justice, and at times bring activists into leadership. This change took root in Los Angeles in 2014 when the union power slate came into leadership to represent and move 34,000 educators across 900 school sites into action, where 90% of our students and families are of color and predominantly low income, but high strengths and high assets. The work of the union takes place on 2 fronts. Internally, which look like transforming the culture, systems, and structures of the union into a more militant and powerful social justice organization, and externally, which was around rebuilding and building relationships with students, families, and broader community. The UTLA leadership acknowledged that it had not always been on the right side of history, a reliable or positive force for students and families or progressive organizations. And we knew that we must take a much deeper look at how disparities in power and resources made power sharing relationships between the union and grassroots groups, as well as parents and teachers, challenging. With the support from the NEA, the AFT, and the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools, we were filled with both added capacity and the hope to embark on the work of shifting the old paradigm of one-way parent and family interactions to actually build on rank and file models of authentic and intentional family and community organizing, as well as healing, rebuilding, and transforming community relationships that were rooted in decades of unions not reaching out at all or reaching out only when needed, and into the creation of a militant and vibrant, politically aligned coalition we now know as Reclaim Our Schools Los Angeles. So the community organizing work that rank and file members and our new leadership centered served as a jumping off point to begin mapping out the education landscape and then develop a plan to do deep listening with groups working on social, racial, and environmental justice campaigns And this listening was key to understanding what people's experiences of the union had been, what their hopes and dreams for education were, and how we could possibly work together for the schools LA students deserve. Now, I want to take a quick minute to demystify this work, because we know that tensions between labor and community has a long history. It's everywhere, and it will continue to exist so long as we don't take a step back to reflect. So the exploratory process really used traditional union and community organizing approaches. We had one-on-ones, we had small group meetings with directors and staff, families and student leaders. And this process proved critical in understanding how groups experienced UTLA over the last 20 plus years, where repair was possible and where it just wasn't, and where possibility existed. So this helped us move into a 6-month process called the Public Education Roundtable, where Professor John Rogers helped convene 12 to 15 groups to do deep study, have conversations to see where disagreements still existed and where we had alignment. At the end of this process, we formed Reclaim Our Schools Los Angeles with the 4 anchor organizations, ACE, which is the Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy, Students Deserve, and UTLA. At this juncture, the union made both a provocative yet necessary decision to give annual programmatic funding to the 3 anchor groups to help us build our fighting capacity. Together, we agreed to build a fierce and militant base of students and families ready to lead a movement for racial justice in schools. The 4 strategic priorities were a campaign to demand community schools, a direct action campaign to challenge the billionaires and bring in new revenue sources to schools, an explicit anti-privatization campaign, and making Black Lives Matter in schools. In 2017, in preparation for contract negotiations, the union moved a survey at 900 school sites asking UTLA members to rank issues based on 3 different frames. Which issues were a top priority for them personally, which issues were a top priority at their school site, and which issues they believed were the highest priority for parents and community members at their schools. This framing was important because we wanted members to think beyond their own self-interest, to truly embody the belief that our working conditions were the learning conditions of our students, and that fighting for their safety and wellness outside of the schoolhouse doors was not only important, but necessary. And this set the stage for our bargaining for the common good work. So Reclaim Our Schools led 5 citywide town halls that brought together housing justice, environmental justice experts, groups like CHIRLA, SEIU Local 99, Black Lives Matter LA, and the Youth Justice Coalition, to name a few. So over 40 groups came together over a span of 3 months to begin developing a community platform, some of which were synthesized into community proposals brought to the bargaining table on September 15th, 2017. So when I tell you that the district gave us the meanest side eye, when we had parents and students presenting proposals on transit justice, on adding more green space, ending random searches. Of course, the district responded with, that's outside of the legal purview of bargaining. So we knew from the beginning that we weren't going to win everything at this one bargaining session. So we engaged the board process, engaged school board members to present a resolution on community schools. We took our fight to the billionaires' doorsteps in their homes in Santa Monica and Pacific Palisades, wherever they lived, we were there. And we approached parent and community organizing in three ways. One, we wanted to ensure that we could build collective power through building a coalition that had strategic unity around a programmatic vision and plan. We experimented with building a CPAL, which is a chapter parent action liaison, so training UTLA members in parent organizing and community organizing skills. As well as ensuring that every single educator on their school site, had the resources and the materials that they needed to engage their 25 to 30, sometimes 50 parents in their classrooms. We know that the most strategic relationship exists between a parent or family member or caregiver with their educator. And we wanted to be able to support our teachers in building those relationships. And the rest, as you know, is history. The 2019 strike, we had 60,000 of our closest friends. And on the 6th day of the strike, we were able to win. We won around bread and butter issues, but on the 6th day of the strike, we were able to win for students and ensuring we can make Black Lives Matter in schools. We won for parents, we won nurses and green space. So I'm gonna stop right there to see if there's any questions, and I can drop the Reclaim Our Schools case study that Lingdingerson, who is on this call, helped us write.
Thank you so much, Esperanza. I also was one of the 50,000 or 60,000 friends. I know so many of us on this call, you know, we feel so inspired by the work that's happening in UTLA. And I do really count that as one of our North Stars in doing this work. And so thank you so much for sharing that. We do have one question. The question is Esperanza. Can you share a specific story or anecdote that sticks out to you on how UTLA repaired relationships with the community to heal and create an authentic Reclaim Our Schools LA? I'd love to hear about this beautiful work.
Yes. A very particular one. There's 7 years of work. I mean, I think that I would say that one that is notable is with SEIU Local 99. I think historically, because Local 99 represents classified staff on school campuses, and we represent certificated staff on school campuses, there's often like, there's never enough money so that everyone can get salary increases, maintain their healthcare benefits and pensions. And I think that in the past, our leadership may not have spent as much time both working with the members of other unions and also building with the leadership. And so I believe it must have been 2014, 2015, our president then, Alex Caputo Pearl, began having monthly meetings with the presidents of those union locals to begin sort of repairing and mending relationships, but also to figure out where it is that we can work together in, you know, whether that be in our bargaining campaign or in ways that we could support their members when they had contract negotiations come up with the school district.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Okay, folks, so thank you for those thoughtful comments from our panelists and also the questions from the audience. We're going to now get into our second half where we're focusing all on the questions that you all in the audience have for the panelists. And so I see that there are a ton of questions in the Q&A. We will get to those, but it's not too late to add more questions. So at the bottom of your screen, if you push the button, or if you're on social media and you'd like to add it to the comments, we can make sure that we try to get to your question in the next 20 or so minutes. If you love what you're hearing and you're interested in doing this type of work of bargaining for the common good, I invite you to visit our website. The link will be in the chat. It's www.bargainingforthecommongood.org. You're also feel free to reach out to me on my email. And then we're also going to include a link that has some of the sample demands that have been coming from groups like on this call, but also from all over the country, from unions who have started to embark on this journey of bargaining for the common good. There's a ton of sample demands, everything from environmental justice to racial justice to equity and more. And so I encourage you to click the link and check those out. All right, so now let's get into it. All right, our first question is, sorry, just let me get my bearings really quick. Okay. First question for the audience. It's actually for Ingrid. particularly. This question says, your roots in the community matter so much, Ingrid. How do people without as deep of ties connect?
I think it's really just doing the work, being authentic, showing up, making an effort, and actually it's not even making an effort, not co-opting others' work. If you notice the example with the ethnic studies, the students were the big push for that. We just back them up. So it's kind of like, hey, the students want this, MTEA believes in this, and we're going to let you know that we're behind the students. So I would just say authentically doing the work, making the connections, listening to people, not assuming things, and making decisions on others' behalf.
Thank you. And also I want to encourage the other panelists, if you have things to add on a question, just because it's for one person doesn't mean we can't hear all of your brilliance. So feel free to jump in as you feel the spirit. Okay, so the next question is for Amanda. It says, did you come up with the survey approach in this coalition? Is it a paper survey? Are you doing one-on-one conversations, or is it some of both?
Yeah, well, we're still developing them because we're very much at the beginning, but all of the above. So one of the things that we did before we even started this was just to piggyback on what Ingrid said, we really committed ourselves to showing up and getting to know the groups that we wanted to partner with. And develop some relationships, and talking to some of the community groups, we asked them, what's the best way to talk to people, in the community that you represent? And some of them said, surveys are not going to work. You're not even going to ask the right question. It's the wrong way to go about it. And some of them were like, yeah, give us the survey, we'll figure, And so I think that, again, I think for those of us in the unions, we're used to kind of driving the bus, right? And you really have to step back if you're going to make this work happen and co-create. And so you have to listen to your community partners. They'll tell you how to do this correctly. And they'll tell you how to ask the questions correctly. And then if you find the right people to do this work, they'll make it work. So yeah, it's a combination of so far we have, the idea is surveys, one-on-ones, focus groups, and town halls. So we're going to be doing all of those over an entire year for the next 3 years.
Amazing. Either Ingrid or Esperanza, you want to add anything about surveys or one-on-ones or ways that you all have done outreach that you've seen work?
Oh, I was gonna okay. I would just say it is all of the above as stated. And I mean, for one of our campaigns, the one with the budget cuts to classrooms and the spousal carve out, we actually went to buildings, stood in front of buildings, talked to parents and bus drivers, anybody, and had a survey card that said, would you rather have students with teachers and the supplies they need, or new furniture? Because honestly, that is what was happening. And people are like, are you crazy? We need smaller class sizes. We need teachers. And we said, cool, could you check this? Can you sign this card? And we gave them a ripoff of the information, and we kept the card so that we can contact them for future actions. So I was kind of answering someone else's question in the box before about like, how do we keep in touch with folks?
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is for Esperanza. It says, my teachers union is currently trying to bargain language that addresses the wealth gap. We know that that's rooted in systemic racism by placing teachers who identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color on the next step on the salary schedule. We found current contract language from our locals, not teacher unions, that support this mission to model our contract language offer, but our district is pushing back and saying it's illegal. And the conversation has stopped there. So do you have any tips on addressing or advice or avenues to push so that we can keep the momentum going, or examples or ideas of other ways to address the wealth gap with collective bargaining? That was a mouthful.
Oh, wow. I think maybe this might be an Ingrid question, but so in terms of continuing to build momentum, I mean, there's engaging students and families. You may already be doing that, but again, like using different avenues to try to both talk about how closing the wealth gap impacts both the teaching conditions and the learning conditions of students, right? I think that's what was really powerful during the build up to the 2019 LA teachers strike, is that in conversation with parents and family and broader community, being able to demonstrate how our contract demands directly improve the lives and educational experience of students was key. But I'm gonna pass it off to Ingrid. I don't know if Ingrid has other things to share specifically on the wealth gap proposal.
So I don't have any experience in that area, and I'm not familiar with any language. I will say that some of our main tenets is that education is a primarily workforce of women. And let's be honest, we have been used. Our time and our efforts have not been valued. Within our district, a majority of the workers who are like building service helpers and cooks and paraprofessionals are people of color. And then looking at the teacher class, having a 7-year wage freeze, it can't happen. It's not right. And it's something that we made sure to actually reinstate salary schedules and also move people on those salary schedules. So I don't have specific insight into that issue, but just looking at the fact that our workers are people of color, they're women, and having a salary freeze, taking away benefits, reducing pension, those have real impact on our families and our communities.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. Our next question is for all three panelists. So all of you feel free to jump in here. People want to know how are you engaging the students in this work?
So I can jump in. One of the ways that we are engaging the students is by intentionally partnering with an organization that is already made up of students and recent graduates of our schools. I think it's important that you're going straight to the source and not just always working with groups that represent other groups. So that's one of the ways that we are doing that, just as a starting place.
I can jump in really quick. I think I want to ask, like, how are the students engaging us? Like, because Los Angeles, I just have to say that Students Deserve is a grassroots coalition of educators and students trying to make Black Lives Matter in schools. And I mean, they were an anchor organization for Reclaim Our Schools, and they still are, but they've been a force in the city for a long time. And so the students actually led when we, in the build up to actually after the strike, when we started talking about, okay, how are we going to make sure that we can end random searches, the students led a presentation for the adults on the history of incarceration and policing in Black communities and Latino communities. And so we learn a lot from them. I think we make it a point to carve out space for their voices and their leadership to be centered. And then I think the other thing that I wanted to add about that is Students Deserve was able to divert $25 million from LA School Police into community schools. So when there's just so much possibility and innovation and creativity when students lead, so we just try to make sure that we carve out space so that they can.
And agreeing with everything previously said, I will also say we identify student groups through our members. So our members are the ones in the buildings working with students, and they will contact the union and say, hey, the students have been working on getting healthy lunches in schools. What can we do together? And we're on the move. I would say that also locally, we've connected with groups who are youth centered. So within the city, we have Youth Empowered in the Struggle, and we also have Leaders Igniting Transformation. So we've partnered with them on art builds, once again, demands at the board, et cetera. I think one of the things that is missing though is the idea of teaching advocacy and organizing. So these are not natural skills for people. And we have to make sure that within our classrooms, within parent groups, within anything, we are teaching people, you have a voice. This is the structure we're working in. This is what we want to do and how it can actually get accomplished, because no one likes hitting their head on a brick wall. But once you start getting those wins, people are there and they're moving.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so our next question I think is a really good one. Somebody asked, how are you all thinking about this work during our current context? Well, we see attacks against educators, the rise of groups advocating for an unsafe return, the politicization of every stance that we're taking. How are you all finding a way to move forward in this context?
That's the question. I think what it has shown us is that this is the work, right? What we've just talked about it's the only way forward. If we as teacher unions stay isolated and just focused on ourselves, we will not weather this storm. I'm just going to be honest with you. Down here in Tennessee, it is rough. And yeah, we're being attacked from all sides. But so are the groups that we're trying to work with. And so, you know, it's the basis of organizing. We got to work together. We got to band together. That's what solidarity is. And that's how we push back. That's the work.
Esperanza or Ingrid, do you have anything additional to share on this question?
I think I would add that what we've done in Reclaim Our Schools Los Angeles and in UTLA is continuing to be in conversation with parents and families and caregivers at our school sites, right? Because sometimes there's so much misinformation, and you know, LA's fortunate to have the bargaining table as a process, right? Families don't always understand contract negotiations and where is everyone at. And so oftentimes, I mean, I got so many calls as a parent and community organizer for the union, parents telling me off, cussing at me, saying that, you know, we were holding their kids hostage for a political agenda. And so really, I think what people want is to feel heard and feel seen and to feel empathy. And so, you know, I couldn't do that with 200,000 family members, but I did it with a few folks, and then we armed our members with, again, like talking points and encouraged them to just listen, right? Parents and caregivers are losing their ish during this pandemic, right? Because they're forced to be teachers and caregivers and workers. And so for us, I guess I would say, like, taking it back to those one-on-one conversations, to hear people out and then talk about how we can move forward together towards a racially just and safe reopening.
Thank you. So the next question, it says it's for Amanda, but I suppose anybody can chime in here. So they want to know, how do we start the process of bargaining for the common good if we're small and everyone in the union is not bought in? What advice can you give to help us get started? That buy-in question.
Absolutely. I know this well. I think you don't do anything different than you do when you're talking to communities and families, right? You just ask people, what is your vision for your school, right? And the coalition that we put together, it's based on the principles of racial and social justice, but it's also based on the principles of labor, right? It also says everybody should be paid well and have safe working conditions, and that, you know, should have dignity in their work. It's all together, right? And I think that a lot of folks in teacher unions are afraid that if we start focusing on communities and social justice, that we're going to forget all about fighting for pay and working conditions. And we're not. It has to be all together there. So, you know, you have to continue to fight for all of these things. And the great thing that I think I've had a lot of conversations with my members about this, is that for them to understand, hey, look, when we show up for other folks, they show up for us, right? Because they start to realize that we really are who we say we are. So if we're doing actions of solidarity with other groups in the community, with other labor groups, they're also showing up for us. And that feels pretty good. And they're starting to actually see that happen and to understand that makes us bigger. That makes us more powerful. So, you know, I think it's just that conversation and making people understand it's not a zero-sum game. You know, we're fighting for everybody here. And because we are going to get big like this, we're going to win.
Thank you so much. So I want to ask you, Esperanza, I know we talked about how to engage students more or how the students can engage us more, but we really want to hear, people are dying to hear stories or anecdotes on ways that the students were actually involved in the strike. What did they do? What did that look like, etc.?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I think about that time in my life, and I just like get all warm and fuzzy because it was phenomenal. And so, you know, I've been a community organizer for 20 years in Los Angeles, work with students, but mostly adults. And so, because Reclaim Our Schools Los Angeles had been in existence for 2 years, you know, we were having Saturday meetings with students, teachers, and caregivers to talk about the campaign, to talk about actions and work. But in the week of the strike, we are at picket lines at 7 in the morning, right? Sometimes earlier, picket lines from 7 to 9, you know, parents, teachers, students, kids. And then we went to UTLA, we went to the Union Hall. And then at the Union Hall, we focused on doing political education around the 1%, right? Or we had different topics for a different part of the day. And then we had skills building. And so in my sort of organizing tendency, like the lead organizers, the paid staff were the tactical leads. But the parents were like, no, like we want to be the tactical leads. And so like sort of, we called it La Escuelita, right? So the little school, and parents and students were like, we want to be the ones leading. And so we had to shift program on the spot during the strike to say, okay, then you guys we will train you on how to be a tactical lead. who does security, right? Like who are the speakers, all the things that you have to know as a tactical lead. And the students and the parents led actions at board member Monica Garcia's house on a rainy ass night, with umbrellas and bullhorns. There's a video, and whenever the next person speaks, I'll try to pull it up and drop it in the link. We went to Edward Syart's home, who's this billionaire, that's like this with Eli Broad, late Eli Broad, education philanthropist. We went to Superintendent Austin Buettner's house, and the students led a press conference. So they prepped people to speak, they led the chants, and it was phenomenal. And on sort of the 11th hour of the strike, we were getting ready to take over the LAUSD school board, like students, teachers, parents ready to take over. And that, then we settled. So we'll hold it off for another time. But the students, they led these actions, these direct actions, with just such grace and creativity. And I'm going to find that video to share with everybody so that you can actually see them in tears, chanting, just in all of their brilliance. Does that give more texture to the example? Okay.
Yes, and I think that you also answered another question, which was like, you keep saying militant. What do you all mean by militant? I feel like that's what you probably mean by militant.
Yes. Militant, like in the streets, right? Militant in our politics, militant, taking our, South Central caregiver and student base all the way to the west side in the Santa Monica Mountains to go find, billionaires that are trying to privatize our schools.
Awesome. So members about organizing, have any of you done that? What did it look like? What structures were in place? Who facilitated, etc.?
Can you repeat the question? You cut out at the beginning, sorry.
Sorry about that. One member of the panel just mentioned union organizers training community members about how to organize. They want to know, have you all done that? What did it look like exactly? Were there structures in place to help that happen? Who facilitated? Just wanting to know more about that process and how to go about setting that up.
I'll start. So one of the actual job that I do that I'm released to is teaching and learning organizer. So I work with building representatives, I work with building committees, I work with members, I work with anybody. And we talk about, what is your concern? What is your problem? And what do you envision as the solution? And how do we get people there? Because we know with building power, it's not a single person that's going to move what needs to be moved. You have to have the people with you, whether it's members of your building or whether it's the community members. So we work as a union, our staff, our release staff, everybody, to bring always the view of everything is an organizing opportunity. And we're going to work with you on the steps of how to do that at your building and in other areas.
Nice. Thank you so much, Ingrid. Okay, so I'm going to get to some quick questions. We only have a couple minutes left. The first one is, how have these efforts or campaigns affected the participation of rank and file?
I will say we have a whole lot more participation than we ever have. We've really shifted from a service model where it's just you get in trouble, you call the union, someone helps you out, to talking about how we fix problems together. So even inside the schools, you know, we have done a lot of trying to build structures in schools, to build little teams, to make sure those teams are trained on how to solve building level problems. And we've also seen a lot more of our members get excited because we've rebuilt our committees that are working on all of these things. People join when they see you doing something they care about. So, you know, that brings people in when they see you doing the work around the issues that are important to them. They want to be a part of that. So, you know, we've actually brought in a lot of membership. We've had, since we've really been in the past 2 years, our membership has increased 37%. So it's done the work for us.
I'll take this time and just piggyback another question that was for Esperanza, which was like, you talked about these 12 to 15 listening sessions, right? Deep listening sessions. People want to know who was invited, what did that look like exactly? So this is in the same vein as the previous question.
Yeah, I actually, I unfortunately was not in those sessions. I wanted to be, but you know, I had to be at school sites working with parents, but organizations, I believe organizations, some of the unions that are represented, that represent LAUSD workers, I imagine the Community Coalition, Inner City Struggle, Cadre, probably Scope, Agenda. So organizations that we had been working with to see where there would be, you know, most unity, most alignment. So, yeah.
Thank you. Ingrid, do you want to add anything about that in particular? You don't have to, but if
you would have to repeat it. I'm sorry.
That's okay. This is just about like the organizing, you know, the community members on how to organize, or the parents on how to organize, or these listening sessions. Kind of like, it's just about the outreach, and do you have any strategies or tips for us, and what that could look like? Well, you already answered that actually.
Well, and I will say this too. Someone did ask the question about how do you educate the community on the public-private thing. One of our partners, actually, we call it the Traveling Road Show, where we just set up community meetings and we invite people in, be it the partners, be it individuals, and they give the talk. They explain what privatization looks like in the state of Wisconsin, in the city of Milwaukee, and what are the next steps. Why are public schools important? What are we fighting for? Community schools, and the next step. So these are just meetings that we've been requested, or we just set up. Once again, we do the survey card. We've done online since the pandemic. So any way we can reach people, we're out there trying to get their opinions and include them in the work.
Thank you so much. And I apologize for that, that I misspoke there. Okay, Amanda, they want to know, is Tennessee going to push back on the ban on critical race theory? Hot seat question.
Are we going to push back on it, or is Tennessee going to push back on it? Those are different questions. So, you know, in the state of Tennessee, we have a Republican supermajority in our state legislature. They are extremely conservative. I think Trump won by a bigger margin the second time than he did even the first time here in this last election. So our state is pretty conservative. What we're doing here in Nashville as a local is our local passed some resolutions at the school board saying that in our schools, in Metro Nashville public schools, you know, we're here to defend our students. We're here to create a welcoming environment and to have curriculum that has a positive reflection of their place in history, and that we're going to stand by that. When I talk to reporters, I mean, I know that they're threatening to take our funding from our schools if we engage on critical conversations about race. Honestly, they can try. I mean, they're going to come here and tell me that we can't have discussions in our classroom. They're going to police us. What? So we're kind of, what we're doing more seriously is our Racial and Social Justice Committee is already been working on creating some guidance for teachers about what the laws are. And it's not just the critical race theory stuff. We had a whole huge slew of bills attacking LGBTQ people, saying that we cannot portray them in any positive way. They can't even be mentioned in history. So creating some guidance for teachers about how to negotiate this in a way that is positive for our students. And quite personally, as a classroom teacher, some state legislature wants to come to my classroom and debate with us, they're welcome. But we're going to do what we do.
Ooh, big mood, Amanda. Thank you so much. Okay, so everyone's asking if you all could drop your Twitter handles, Facebook name, and your Instagram, if you have that, in the chat so that people can keep up with all the amazing work that all of you are doing. But I'm afraid our time is up. So go ahead and share that in the chat. I want to thank everyone who was involved in bringing this event together. Big shout outs and thank you to Crystal, our ASL interpreter. Thank you so much. Thank you to our amazing questions. You all will be receiving follow-up emails about this and upcoming events. And thanks to everyone who we can't see, who has been working in the background, like Ursula, Missy, Bob, and Lee. Thank you so much. The panelists tonight have given us a lot to think about and some concrete steps on how we can move forward with this framework in our own unions or not unions. Remember, power concedes nothing without a demand. And right now it's our time to make bold, inclusive demands for structural change. Our future literally depends on it. Thank you so much. Have a good night, all.